let's get into a story that kicks off with a pretty wild standoff between an AI giant and a global superpower. But where it ends up, well, that's where we find the hidden financial engine that's driving this entire AI boom. So back in early 2026, the AI company Anthropic found itself in a pretty unprecedented conflict with the Pentagon. And as its CEO Dario Amodei said, the government's response was just different. It was something he'd never seen before, and it really peels back the curtain on who's actually calling the shots in the future of artificial intelligence. All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with that public showdown, and then we'll dig into who is really writing the rules for AI. From there, we pivot to this hidden financial loop that's powering the industry and ask a really big question. Is the AI boom even real? Finally, we'll explore what regulators could do and wrap it all up with this fundamental question of control. It all kicked off when one AI company drew a couple of red lines in the sand for the US military, and that one move sparked a major political firestorm. Okay, so here's the breakdown. Anthropic basically said, look, you can't use our AI model Claude for two things: fully autonomous weapons and mass surveillance of Americans. The reasoning? They argued the tech just wasn't reliable enough for weapons, and that mass surveillance, well, that threatens core democratic values. The Pentagon, though, they just wanted unrestricted access for all lawful purposes. And check out how fast things blew up. The Department of Defense gave Anthropic just 3 days to comply before designating it a supply chain risk. Now, you've got to understand, that's a label normally reserved for foreign adversaries, think Russian cybersecurity firms. It had never, ever been used against an American company before. So this whole conflict brings up a huge question, right? If a private company can just say no to the government on something as big as national security, who is actually writing the rules for this technology? Who's in charge here? To try and guide its AI, Anthropic did something pretty extraordinary. They created a constitution. And I'm not talking about some boring terms of service agreement. This is a super detailed 79-page document that gets into philosophy to explain why its AI should act a certain way. This constitution even gives the AI something like conscientious objection. It's a framework for refusing requests that violate its core principles. And the ultimate authority? The document says the AI should basically imagine what a senior Anthropic employee would do in that situation. But, of course, there's a problem with that. Critics like legal scholar Gilad Abiri point out that no matter how smart or thoughtful a document is, if it's written by a team in San Francisco, it's not a substitute for democratic governance. It gives you transparency, sure, but not real public legitimacy. And here it is. This is the fatal flaw. Anthropic itself admitted that its super elaborate ethical constitution, well, it wouldn't necessarily apply to models used by the US military. So those ethical rules are basically a feature of the consumer product, not a hard and fast constraint when a big government contract is on the line. So that's the public fight over ethics and control. But believe it or not, that's only half the story. To really understand the AI industry's power, we have to look at the hidden financial plumbing that's holding the whole thing up. I mean, the cost of training these massive AI models is just astronomical. It really makes you wonder, who is footing the bill? Well, if you follow the money, you find it's moving in a surprisingly circular path. Analysts have a name for this, the cloud credit circuit, or sometimes they call it AI circular deals. And it's basically the financial engine that's quietly powering the entire industry, creating this strange feedback loop between the tech giants and the hottest AI startups. So here's how this crazy loop works. A cloud provider, like Microsoft, invests billions in an AI company, like OpenAI. As part of that deal, OpenAI then commits to spending all that money on Microsoft's cloud services. OpenAI spends the investment to train its models, and then, this is the best part, Microsoft gets to report all that spending as new cloud revenue, which makes its stock price look amazing. A huge chunk of the money never even leaves the building. And this isn't just a one-off thing. A 2025 FTC report documented this across the board. It's a systemic pattern. You see it with Amazon and Anthropic, Google and Anthropic, even the chipmaker, NVIDIA, who invests in startups that then use the money to, you guessed it, buy more NVIDIA chips. Okay, so this brings us to a really critical question. If a huge portion of the revenue we're seeing is just money moving in a circle, what does that say about the real organic demand for AI? It means that a big part of what looks like explosive market growth is actually being financially engineered inside this closed loop. Yeah, the usage numbers are real on a balance sheet,
but they aren't coming from a broad base of regular customers making independent buying decisions.
And this matters. It matters a lot because massive public and private investments are being justified based on these potentially inflated signals. We're talking about things like the proposed $500 billion Stargate supercomputer or subsidies from the CHIPS Act. We're committing decades of resources based on a market that might not be what it seems. Now, federal regulators are definitely starting to ask questions. The FTC put out a report that highlighted how these deals can kill competition, but their focus has really been on anti-competitive behavior, not on the more fundamental question of whether the market itself is partially an illusion. So, with all this political and financial power getting so concentrated, how do we reintroduce some public oversight? Well, analysts have actually put together a pretty clear regulatory playbook. The proposals are all about transparency and accountability. First, the SEC could make companies report exactly how much of their cloud revenue is just their own investment money coming back to them. Second, government subsidies should require independent proof that the demand is real. And third, financial regulators should start treating the AI industry's interconnectedness as a potential systemic risk, just like they did with the big banks after the 2008 crisis. And this brings us right back to where we started, to the fundamental question of power and control in this new age of AI. We have seen a corporation stand up to a government over its values, raising all sorts of questions about democratic authority. And at the exact same time, the industry's financial structure is manufacturing market signals that are influencing massive public spending and shaping our entire economic future. So, ultimately, as these systems get woven into every part of our lives, the decision of who writes the rules, both for AI's values and for its economy, well, that can't be left to private actors alone. The most important debate we can have isn't just about what AI can do, it's about who gets to decide.